then the law to go to is the Section of Properties Act of 2020-2021. And so that is one of the, the reforms we are carrying out. And then you have digitalization of the lands registries. And as you know, once we get there, our intention is that at the click of a button, you're able to get your search, and hopefully also within a few days, you're able to get your registration, if it is a title to your house or to your land. And again, it's good to mention that when you're registering the house, it can be on the land itself, or it can also be, again, on a block of flats or apartments. And it's important to mention that other things that the ministry and the government generally is trying to do also is to waive stamp duties and other fees for first-time homeowners. And my boss there will agree with me that there was an amendment to the Stamp Duties Act, Cap 470, at Section 117, and together with the Department of Housing and Treasury, we hope that they're going to come up with proper rules to know who exactly is to be exempt from, the stamp duty, and how to identify who is a first-time house or home owner, as it were. And so we are carrying out again, as it were, the automation and modernization of our lands registries. So because I know we've gone quite a bit, then you also look at what are the advantages of a digitalized lands registry. At the click of a button, you're able to see a couple of things. For example, in Kenya we have got very many land disputes. In the developed world, we have got very few land disputes. But because we have been largely manual for the last 100 years and over, there are so many disputes, and it's hard to deal with them because our records are largely manual. But if they are properly automated, then of course at the click of a button, the court will be able to see. You'll be surprised that I did my study sometime out of the country, and they were telling me you never have land disputes or land investigations. It will take like a whole 1 or 2 years to get that. But in Kenya we have a land fraud department, the DCI. We have the land court, environment and land court, majorly dealing with fraud cases. And of course, we also have most of our magistrate courts. They also deal with a lot of land and housing issues. And of course, succession courts, they are always dealing with a brother trying to get something from a sister. I'll be done next few minutes. Then of course, one of the important again is that we facilitate growth of economy, we protect state lands when we have proper land registration, and we facilitate then a thriving economy, as it were, and we secure land tenure. And the Kenya's land registry, again, to show how we are helping to get affordable housing. We have about 62 land registries spread across the 47 counties. For instance, Nairobi has 1 county, Kiambu has about 3 land registries, Mombasa has about 2, and so we are trying our best to create reachability and accessibility of our land registration service. And as it were, the land register is a public register, so everyone can go about searching the properties. About 40% of our properties and land titled. Those are the functions of the lands registry: carrying out assessment of stamp duty, issuance of titles, issuance of the land information if you want to buy a property. And if you want to develop, of course, the first place to go to is at the lands registry to carry out a search to know whether land is available and of what use is that, because a title shows you the user of the property. 1 more minute and I'll be done. Then there's the steps of conveyancing. I won't go through that, but they are highly simplified. And again, especially because we have the unifying law, the Land Registration Act of 2012. So it makes our work pretty easy. And so to facilitate, as it were, again, affordable housing, what we do is provide you with information about land through issuance of searches, quick retrieval of files, and then, of course, we make sure that we have adequate and very fast registration of mortgages and your properties whenever you're registering any property transactions, because that's what majorly the land registry does. Finally, so we also make sure that you have certainty of ownership. And where your land has an issue or you suffer loss because of the information relied on from the ministry, then the title registration has what we call the insurance principle. And that makes sure that you can go to court and claim compensation from the government. And lastly, I probably won't say that, housing and land, they are human rights recognized under Articles 40 and 43 of the Constitution, respectively. We also have the National Titling Center. So if you have a bulk registration of titles of housing or a project, that's where we go to. And then, of course, we mentioned the Section of Properties Act and the exemption of stamp duties and other fees. And currently, we have also waived the production of the necessity of use of completion documents, that is the land rent clearance certificate, rates clearance certificates, and other, the commissioner's consent and the rest. And lastly, so we have simple conveyancing also adopted ease of doing business strategies that have been of late, being fronted by the World Bank. And also we cooperate with the relevant agencies, the National Lands Commission, the HFC, the Kenya Bankers Association, the LSK, and the ISK. And I think because the facilitator is here, I think I'm going to leave it there. Asante.
Many thanks to the team from the Ministry of Lands for walking us through that detail. We truly appreciate. I want just to take a few minutes to invite any questions we have to them as I ask our technical team to get the set here ready for the panel. I think we have fewer mics than we will need for the next session. There's a question on that end. The roving microphones. There's a question on the extreme end here. Any other? There's a gentleman here as well. So we can start with those. We have quick responses and then we get back to our discussion. There was a hand here. Then we can go to the lady there. Yeah. Please remember one question, just one.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Sanya from Fusion Estates. My question is regarding public participation, not really public participation, but sensitization of the public with regard to sectional properties and the requirements for conversion so that you get the new titles. From my personal experience, the process, you might need to involve an advocate for them to do that. And if we are talking about affordable housing and making it affordable, not every other person can be able to afford the services of a lawyer. To add on to that, there's I spoke to a surveyor. There's an additional cost of geotagging the properties, and my worry is, are these costs controlled, or is there a way that the ministry can be able to moderate these costs of geotagging and the additional costs? Because we didn't ask for the titles to be converted. I know it's a good thing, but then there's the cost that is involved. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The issue of sectional titles. There's a question there.
Yes, my name is Nansieta Ndumi, and I'm from Mwalimu Assets Management. We have a very big project in Kisaju, and I'm happy to note that we actually tick all the criteria for affordable housing. My question relates to the Sectional Properties Act 2020. I think we are the first properties that have converted and have gotten sectional titles for their apartments. I'd like to ask the officers for the ministry to probably shed some light in regards to the formation of the corporation, which I think we normally, in the past, we referred to as management company. I think one of the presenters earlier today in the morning mentioned the importance of the residents having a path or being part of the decision-making process within the estate. And what you're finding in the affordable housing sector is that the property developers are reluctant to include the residents in the decision-making process, yet the residents are the ones who are paying service charge to manage the estate. So I think it would be helpful to sort of give us guidance on the separation at the point where the asset or the house is transferred to the resident.
Thank you for that. Maybe just move the microphone since they are next to you, so we just get answers from them right there, actually.
Thank you. Let's start with the last question as pertains the Section of Properties Act and the formation of the corporation. Earlier used to be that so long as you have the section of plan, then the corporation automatically forms. And in this case, the management or the developers, they also come in handy, and they register a company at Sharia House and name it the name and give it, and the end of that name has to be management company. And how it works is that unless the directors are not clear about it, it should operate as a normal company. And with the rotation of directors and managers, and it should be employment of a property manager, depending on how it is. And every homeowner becomes a shareholder in that corporation. And of course, in that case, they have the right to vote and the right to make decisions. And in the very many other places, whether section or rather who have an association of residents, they always call meetings and they make decisions therein, as it were. So bottom line is for the members to get together, because you are a shareholder and you have a say depending on the number of shares that you have, and that should be, as it were, the way to move on. The other one is about public participation. My senior is here, but I know that there was enough, again, public participation when the law was being promulgated in the years 2020, 2021. And again, as we mentioned earlier, ways of reducing the costs was the waiving of searching fee. Right now, you are not the search fee has been waived generally for all searches across the country, and also the reduction of registration fee. Also, registration fee is free for all properties in the country. Probably the other one that maybe we need to move both Treasury and the Department of Housing is now to do with coming up with regulations to deal with stamp duties and the capital gains tax, so that that can also be dealt with at that level.
Thank you for those responses. Let me cut it there and invite the next session, where we shall have a panel focusing on the impact of the regulatory reforms and incentives on growth of affordable housing. So the moderator is Mr. Nyale Anga from KMRC. Mr. Nyale, please come on set. The panelists are Jane Mwangi from Robson Harris Advocates, if you could join us. We have Margaret Karanja, Chief Manager at KRA. We have FCPA Wycliffe Shamia, CEO of CMA. We have Samson Lukoba, Head of Legal at NCA. We have Peter Njuguna. We have Peter Njuguna from SASRA. And we have one more panelist. Let me just make that quick reference. That is Mr. John Kerr from RBA. Joining us. Karibuni on set. This panel is slated to take 40 minutes, so please let's adhere to that so that we can continue with the program.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have this great panel with us this afternoon, made up of the regulators in the industry, practitioners who have done a lot of conveyancing, so they are very much aware about the bottlenecks and probably the solutions to what can drive affordable housing space. We also have NCA, as has been introduced. And so maybe to start us off, I will start with our regulators, and maybe I'll start with you, Bwana Shamia, as well as Peter. What type of regulatory reforms have you initiated in your sectors that drive affordable housing, or you can say that they go towards accelerating home ownership?
So, thank you, Yanga, and maybe just first to say I'm happy to join you today in these discussions, those who are here physically and also those who are joining us online. And I will speak about capital markets. One, this is where you find long-term funds, and it's sometimes we are misunderstood because maybe from the past frameworks, the impression created was you need to be too big to then comply with the requirements when you need to raise funds from capital markets. We have looked at this, and we are trying to see how we facilitate any outfits that can fit within the legal frameworks so that they can raise funds. So any of the instruments which are prescribed within our regulations that can be used to raise funds are open. You can use them, even for affordable housing. But particularly, I think we have had to come up with a specific vehicle we call real estate investment trust, which are specifically supposed to allow investors, let me say retailers, join others in owning maybe property, real estate. They can also participate in construction. So the legal framework is there as we speak. And I would only confirm that we have capacity for those who are used to structure those instruments, so that those who want to pull funds through those vehicles can. And we do facilitation. So far, we have around 3 REITs which are registered, and we hope to see more. When you look at also the asset-backed securities, we have a legal framework which is also available. We haven't tested it because there were issues, especially around taxation and other matters. And I like the presentation which I've heard from the Ministry of Lands, because when you talk of building, I think land is a major aspect, and perhaps most of the obstacles they have spoken about need to be actually handled in a certain way. However, what is important as far as legal frameworks are concerned, we have expanded the bracket to even those who initially will not raise money. So in our draft regulations which allow raising funds, we open it even to, small, medium enterprises to see how they can raise funds. We have also looked at the collective investment schemes just to see, so what do we need to revise so that those vehicles are available and investors can use them to raise funds which could be used in different ways. So let me stop at that, because I know we are many, so that as others can also contribute.
Thank you so much, Wana Shamia. Maybe to you, Peter, in your space, what are some of these reforms that you have initiated that drive or accelerate affordable housing?
Thank you, Nyanga. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to share insights from the SACCO industry. And I'll start from where Shamia has started about collective investment vehicle. Because long before we started this conversation about affordable housing, SACCOs have been playing in that space for the longest. They are essentially a collective investment vehicle. And I think traditionally you'll find development, education, and school loans, and emergency loans were the traditional, typical products. And I think that were informed by the member needs. And therefore, SASRA is now 12 years. But I think SACCOs, from the data we have, is clearly has been playing in that space, albeit in a non-structured way, financing land and construction in an incremental way. And that conversation was going on when we started discussing about housing and where all these housing coming up being funded from. And we did a study 2016 on the loan book, and that's one of the starting point for some of the reforms we are pursuing. Because the idea was SACCOs report loans to members in billions, but where do they go? When in that study, a third of that was actually going to housing, land and housing. And eventually, from now, we do collect data on a quarterly basis on sectoral lending, and that has been consistent. That it is a third, last year it dropped to about 27, but it's about land and housing. But the model for SACCOs has been you drive your needs. The idea has been we don't tie you, it's urban, it's wherever it is, even if it's in your rural home, take the loan using your pay slip or your income, develop your land, you come, and that has financed a lot of houses, and that explained why even today land and housing is the biggest sector that SACCOs lend, followed by agriculture, education. The data we have consistently has the most before you come to SMEs. And therefore, having collected that data, we have gone further and noted that half of that, actually 30%, half actually goes to land and all these costs that go to land acquisition. The other half, 50%, goes to construction and house improvement. And that was very critical. We were able to report that. And I think that's the basis of conversation that I've had as KMRC came on board. It was very easy to onboard SACCOs because they knew there was already housing portfolio, and it's a question of now. So we therefore 11 SACCOs were able to join in KMRC to participate, and this is now formalizing the housing loans they have been giving so that they are properly mortgage facilities, because the incremental housing which has funded a lot of that strains your balance sheet. But we have also seen another now intervention with the prudential regulation. SACCOs are more liquid. When we came, nearly 20% of the assets for SACCOs would be funded from external borrowing. Today we are talking of less than 4% being funded from bank loans and other external. So SACCOs have able to raise money through the regulatory reforms in the industry, and that has meant they can now give loans from, most of us knew the 3%. Now we have approvals we grant for up to 10 years. And that is not your typical loan. So SACCOs are continuing to play in this space because that has been their space as dictated by members. And that, therefore, us granting approvals for long tenure shows the liquidity has improved, and therefore the regulatory reforms broadly has strengthened the balance sheet of SACCOs, giving them more liquidity. The next area we are doing right now, there is a study that is going on now on capital adequacy reform. SACCOs globally, one of the major constraints being member or rather user, owner, financial institution, the customer is also the owner, are constrained. Their member source of capital is basically equity from members or retention of earnings. And therefore, we are trying to study that area to see whether there is room to expand to tier 2 type of capital, where they can raise, additional capital. And that will, again, strengthen their balance sheet to fund, match their funding tenor to the demands for housing. So the third area is, I would say, is tax reforms. 2018, we pushed a case to have, for long, Income Tax Act did not provide you relief if you funded your loan through a SACCO. And we were able to have that amended. Now, SACCO specifically now are eligible for that. There are administrative aspects, perhaps, that needs to be addressed so that they can benefit. But that, again, was to just arising from the data we collected, we say, look, a lot of housing. So then why is it that you talk of other financial institutions when it reaches number 4, SACCOs are not given the tax relief? So that at least income tax was amended to accommodate that. Now, lastly, is to avoid SACCOs carrying this land and the likes in their balance sheet. Now, the registration of housing, asset management, investment cooperative now, again, was allowed, so that now they have special purpose vehicles which members promote, not necessarily the SACCO, because we don't want them to take that risk direct, it's the members. Therefore, the registering that then enables them to actually come together, collectively, buy land in Kitengera, wherever, and by subdividing that, like Jane said, then people can own houses, the smaller units. Of course, now with affordable housing, the conversation, housing cooperative are asking, look, we have land. Currently, there is talk of about 150,000 to 200,000 acres they hold across the city and county headquarters. And the question is, how do we partner with government to bring the infrastructure, which is the biggest headache, so that we can develop these units? And that's an ongoing conversation to see that how do we develop existing lands that housing cooperative own, because on the other hand, the demand side, the SACCO is ready to finance. So SACCOs by and large have been playing in the demand side, but also the supply side because of financing the acquisition of land and development. So they play in both sides, and we would say with the reforms that are coming, we expect these to scale up as long as we streamline, especially tax issues, and how housing cooperatives, which are essentially collective investment vehicles, can actually be eligible. We know there are reforms that were done for when they develop bulk, to give them tax physical incentives. Those are also there. And I think that's some of the reforms that have gone, but we are looking, especially working with the State Department for Housing, to actually see how, because this gospel, affordable housing, I would say, has not sunk. Looking at the data KMRC has, and the uptake by the SACCOs, it tells you members are still stuck with the old model of incremental housing, because you develop the house where you want. So there's a conversation we need to have, possibly education more, so that members realize that you actually can even do multiple projects when you spread your 4 million to 10 years, 15 years, as opposed to funding 5 years, then go back, another 4 years. So there's a bit of education, and the tax benefits that actually arise when you use mortgage code. I would say when you look at the data and how much KMRC is financing, it tells you the SACCO members who are seated here, we are still stuck with the incremental financing way. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Peter, for those insights. John, you are the custodian of our pension money, and I know you have also done some reforms in that sector to accelerate acquisition of houses. Maybe you can also highlight what you have done in the retirement benefit space.
Thank you very much, Young, and good afternoon, everyone. At the Retirement Benefits Authority, of course, we oversee the sector with over 1,000 schemes, which have assets under management, accumulated assets under management of about 1.5 trillion. These are also, we can also classify these as long-term savings, and therefore, with respect to the aspect of supply side, these funds can be used for purposes of financing debt instruments that can be used to put up or construct affordable housing. So to this extent, we have amended our investment guidelines to facilitate or to provide for pension schemes to be able to invest at least 10% of those funds into debt instruments towards affordable housing. So we're talking of about 150 billion that potentially that could be used to finance such projects. On the demand side, we have amended our regulations. We have what are called the mortgage regulations, which allow members of pension schemes to be able to use their retirement benefits for purposes of buying or residential houses. So there are two ways you can do this. They can use these as guarantees for mortgage facilities, or they can use these as to outrightly purchase houses. Of course, there are restrictions there which inform this, but nonetheless, this is to facilitate members to purchase houses. Now, what informed this was we also did a survey, and we were able to establish that 5% of pensioners used their funds towards housing, whether it is paying rent or construction. And so we felt the need to play our role in facilitating home ownership in the country. So this is what we are doing at the moment. And for purposes of, in terms of impact, we do have pension schemes that have taken up these mortgage regulations and are offering these services to their members. We've also had various financial providers inquire and get more information about how they can come up with instruments to this end. We are reviewing a few and we've approved one so far. So I think to that extent, that's RBA's role. Of course, we are under no illusion that this is enough. So in terms of incentives, we are looking at how we can negotiate with the tax authorities to encourage, to introduce more tax incentives that will encourage members of pension schemes to procure housing through their schemes through some various tax incentives. So this is still a conversation that we're having at the moment, and we are looking forward to also expanding the law to facilitate for construction. Currently it's only built-up units with certificates of occupation, so to expand the law so that it can accommodate, it can be flexible enough to accommodate the various options that members would be interested in putting up housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that. Let me just turn to Sam. Probably your institution is very critical as far as the housing agenda is concerned, but maybe not many of us know the role you play as far as affordable housing is concerned. Maybe you can also give us some highlights about your institution and what it does in this area.
Thank you, Inyali. The National Construction Authority is a regulator in the construction space. We are established under the National Construction Authority Act of 2011, primarily to regulate the space in which actual construction takes place. So the primary people that we regulate are contractors through registration and licensing, and also accreditation of skilled construction workers and construction site supervisors. We also coordinate the construction process by looking at what other players do, that is the engineers and architects, both of whom are regulated by other bodies in the process of putting up construction. So construction is, of course, beyond houses. We also look at the roads, we do harbors, we look at all the type of infrastructure that is being built at any given point in time, because all of it has a role to play in terms of ensuring that access to housing is guaranteed, because if you don't have a good road, then certainly even if you put up a good housing project that is affordable, then it may not be accessible. So we make sure that all that space is regulated. Now, in terms of some of the reforms that have been done in the recent past to ensure that the housing agenda is successful, in 2020, in March of 2020, there was an amendment to the NCA Act that anchored the building code under the NCA Act. So at present, the National Construction Authority is responsible for, of course, the overseeing of the development of the building code and any developments that arise there under. The building code was previously under the Local Authorities Act, but with coming into place of county governments, the County Government Act, for some reason it was left without a parent act, so there was need to have it anchored somewhere before it could amended. The code that is currently in use is I think the 1968 document, which is quite, we would say, antiquated. It doesn't respond to the needs of the construction industry currently. A lot of the challenges that you are having in terms of even innovation are because of the rigid nature of the current code. So there is definitely need to ensure that that space is reformed, a new code comes into place. And we have done quite a bit of work with, of course, the stakeholders in terms of developing the code. It's now in the final stages of preparation at the Office of the Attorney General. And in the coming days, what we are looking forward to is having the code tabled in Parliament through the committees of delegated legislation of both the National Assembly and the Senate, so that then, if it meets the approval of Parliament, it can become the standard that can be used to, first of all, ensure that the houses that are being built are able to respond to the needs of the communities. One of the challenges that we have with the current code is that it is prescriptive in nature. So it prescribes the kind of material that you're supposed to use when you're building a house. For example, even the stone that you're supposed to use, I think, is supposed to be a particular stone from a particular quarry, if I'm not wrong. So with that, you find very little innovation is able to take place or get approved under the current code. But the new code is performance-based, so we are going to look at materials that are available in local areas, and how well they perform, how well they respond, and those are the materials that would be recommended for approval in terms of developing the affordable housing. If you know, I don't know how many of us have been around the country, but if you went to Garissa, you'll find that as they build houses in Garissa, they actually bring stones all the way from Thika. But people in Garissa have always built houses. There is material in Garissa probably that can be used to put up houses. So there is work that needs to be done in terms of doing research, in terms of the local material that is available in those areas, that would then be used to ensure that the affordable housing agenda is attained. In terms of other reforms, and they were alluded to by the speakers who were here in the morning. The PS did speak about the Juakali manual. We have developed the standards for the 69 products that he mentioned. All the components that were used in the affordable housing projects that have been undertaken to date, including the Park Road project, were actually used, or rather produced, using the standard that was prepared by the National Construction Authority. So there is quite a bit of work that has been done. There's a bit that is still outstanding, but we are on top of it in terms of ensuring that the housing agenda is attained. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I think the discussions this morning when it comes to incentives centers around tax matters, and we are glad to have Margaret from the KRA. Maybe you can highlight to us, Margaret, these tax incentives, are they there? Are they working? What are some of them which are people are benefiting from? Or what are some of the incentives which maybe are working on, which can actually accelerate uptake in affordable housing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Yanga, and good afternoon, all of us, even those that are joining us online. I'm Margaret Karanja, in charge of tax exemptions and remissions at the Domestic Taxes Department, but I'm here representing the Revenue Agency, Kenya Revenue Authority. I've been sitting here since morning, and I've had a lot of issues revolving around tax exemption, and I believe I will be able to put the issue of tax exemption and the tax incentives that are in place to help support the delivery of affordable housing into perspective. And hopefully we'll be able to understand it differently and be able to maybe change the narrative that has been going around. As we all know, Kenya Revenue Authority is the main revenue, government revenue collection agency. And we basically administer the tax statutes. And we know who is responsible for crafting the tax statutes. But in as much as we have to collect the much needed government revenue to fund government expenditure for delivery of public services, the government is kind enough to take with one hand and also give back to society with the other hand. That's what I will be taking us through this afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting KRA to this conference where we can participate in this discussion. And KRA is therefore a major stakeholder in the delivery of affordable housing through administration of the available tax incentives. Now, taking you through the available tax incentives, I'll begin with what we have under the VAT Act. We have a paragraph that provides for VAT exemption of goods imported or locally purchased for direct and exclusive use in the construction of houses under an affordable housing scheme approved by the Cabinet Secretary on recommendation of the Cabinet Secretary responsible for matters relating to housing. This actually was brought in back in 2019, and I'm glad to report in this forum that we have had about 5 developers taking advantage of this tax incentive. And from the 5 developers, we have processed a total of 146 applications with a VAT value of 645,492.64 shillings. That translates to a total local supplies value of 4 billion Kenya shillings. I think that makes a very good statement that the government is indeed committed to support the delivery of affordable houses through these tax incentives. I would like also to say that we are quite efficient in terms of processing these applications. We have very stringent timelines. Under the VAT law, we process all applications for tax exemptions, whether it is exemption or zero rating, within 30 days. In fact, for all the 146 that we have received from the year 2019, they were all processed within 30 days, and 46 of them were actually processed within the same day of lodgement. What maybe I would like to say regarding this particular process is that it is shared. It could be a bit lengthy, and it's also manual. But then we are up to the task and we are able to deliver. So whoever is willing to take advantage of this incentive, they only need to understand the process, which then should begin from the Rhine Ministry all the way to the National Treasury, because that is the process that has been laid down by the National Treasury. There are very stringent guidelines that have to be followed by all the parties and the players involved. But from our side, we do it very fast, and we are committed to deliver the exemptions if all the requirements are met within 30 days. That is one of the tax incentives. I am informed that out of the 5 developers that have taken advantage of the tax incentive under the VAT law, the total number of units being done, which is a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom houses, it's a total of 7,387 units. Some of them are fully complete. I think there is one project that has up to 70% uptake, but others are still work in progress. I'm informed one of them is 30% complete, and the delay is not occasioned by failure to process the tax exemption applications, but rather by variations, I think, in the contract terms. We have not had any applications on imports. So the incentives available within the VAT law provide for both supplies that are sourced locally and those that are imported. But what I would like us to note from there is that the incentive is on goods, taxable goods only, not on taxable goods and services. Perhaps I'll be explaining that later. Under the income tax regime, we have two incentives again, for buyers and for the developers. For buyers, it is provided for under Section 30A of the Income Tax Act. And that provision provides that a person who has applied and is awaiting allocation of a house or is saving towards the purchase of a residential house under the Affordable Housing Scheme approved by the Cabinet Secretary in charge of housing shall be entitled to a relief of 15% of the contribution made. But it is capped at 108,000 per year. So that again, it's an incentive that is available to those who would like to save with the schemes that have been approved by the Cabinet Secretary under the Affordable Housing Scheme. I do not have statistics regarding the uptake of that, but it is available. The other incentive still available under the income tax regime is for developers. Those that are developing the residential houses. The third schedule to the Income Tax Act provides for a preferential tax rate of 15%. We all know that the corporation tax rate is 30%. But for any company that is involved in the development of building over 100 units in a year of income, they are entitled to have to apply the preferential rate of 15%. But again, there is a proviso there that is tied to an approval by the Cabinet Secretary. Maybe these are some of the things. The last one that I've talked about, it is not provided for under the Affordable Housing regime, but it is available within the Income Tax Act. And any company that is involved in building this kind of houses and is able to put up 100 houses in a year of income can take advantage of that. Now, maybe going forward, there might be need to propose legislative amendments that could expand the scope of these incentives. But again, perhaps as we continue with this conversation, we'll have an opportunity to look at that. But for now, I would like to pause or maybe stop there. But I believe we have taken note of the incentives that are available and the income tax and the VAT.
Thank you so much. I think those are good insights. So the incentives are there, and actually some people have already benefited from them. And so it's up to us to follow the process and sure we will benefit from that. Now coming to you, Jen, sitting on the other side as a practitioner and all those people who want to own houses, to do a lot of conveyancing pass through you, are these initiatives, are these benefits, do you experience your
who can also add to some of the issues and benefited from the Sectional Properties Act 2020, despite some of the challenges we faced, has made it easy also for individuals to own properties absolute ownership, where they don't have to go for consents from the manager and all that. So that makes it much, much easier. The other thing I've seen also is the creation of the reduction of interests from to single digits. I understand, although KMRC lends out to the primary mortgage lenders at 5.6%, you are lending now, the institutions are lending at between 7 to 9.5. And then the other one I've seen, number 3, is SACCOs and the cooperatives have also worked very well with our clients. Some of them like Stima SACCO, Marisha, Ukulima, Tower SACCO, who have worked with the KMRC in this regard, and they are also members of KMRC. And I think the enhancement of regulatory processes at the SACCO through SASRA has also helped a lot. And then on the issue of the taxes, unfortunately, some of our clients that have found it very difficult to get these tax exemptions that Margaret has talked about, but perhaps we're headed there. There was 2 projects that we did in Mombasa County that when it came to process, so that's something I've seen was a benefit to our clients. I think apart from those 5, Nyale, I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I know there are many questions from the floor which will be coming up. I know Sita is already raising a hand. And I'm sure the panel is ready to answer those questions. But let me just allow my panel just in half a second each just to give a parting shot, and also just maybe highlight one key reform area that they think is necessary to move the affordable housing agenda forward. Maybe I'll start from the far end, coming this side. Just one point that you think, if done or unlocked, it will spiral uptake in affordable housing.
Okay, so from the pension perspective is the benefit from for the mortgage regulations is increased savings. So the more savings you have, the more you can benefit from purchasing a house. So for us, it's really to encourage the increase of savings through retirement schemes. We have the addition of voluntary contributions. We have the expansion to increasing participation of the informal sector. This is an alternative financing option, so it's important that it's embraced in order for potential homeowners to actualize their dreams with respect to owning a property. Thank you.
Thank you. From NCA, as I mentioned earlier, we regulate the space where the actual construction happens. However, one of the big deficits that we have is skilled construction workers. It's a big challenge for the industry, but we have put in measures to ensure that we introduce of prior learning. And in the 61 projects that are being rolled out, what NCA is going to do is that we are going to accredit skilled workers on site, and this is going largely to be based on recommendations that we get from contractors. Of course, we know that there is also construction happening back in the rural areas where we have quite a number of people who also need to be recognized. And some of the measures that we have put in is that you don't need the services of a contractor to do a simple house that you're going to live in yourself. So we are using the skills within the rural areas that we recognize through this same process, that then the skilled construction workers and construction site supervisors will be the ones who will be responsible for putting up such houses. For as long as they don't have very complicated structural elements, then we will also see a lot of improvement in the housing stock in the rural areas. Of course, addressing some of the challenges that were identified by some of the speakers earlier.
Thank you. From KRA, the proposal would be, first of all, to automate the tax exemption process for VAT. It's a lengthy process, and it is shared by many players, right from the line ministry to the National Treasury, and finally to KRA. So if we can push this to be automated, and I know our peers, Dr. Julius Muya, who spoke this morning, is very committed to the automation of this, but if it can be accelerated, I believe it can help us to turn around the applications in a record time. The other issue that probably we need to consider doing is to put in legislative proposals to expand the scope of the tax exemption for VAT. Like I pointed out, the tax exemption for supplies for these projects is limited to goods only, taxable goods. If you can put in a proposal to include services, that will also lower the cost of these units. Then, lastly but not least, I know the issue of tax incentives is a very complex one in terms of evaluating or monitoring the impact. It is one thing for the government to grant these tax incentives, but it is another thing for the incentives to be enjoyed by the intended recipients. The challenge that I want to leave with the KMRC is that of a cost control mechanism. Maybe you need to come up with a mechanism to ensure that the tax incentives that have been granted by the government are actually factored in the cost structure of these units, because they are incentives that are meant to lower the costs of the units to make them affordable to the purchasers. So those are my three contributions that will help us to make the delivery of this more efficient, faster, and less costly. Thank you.
You can pick it up from there. Just one point that you think can be unlocked to address.
Yeah, I think for me is I talked of about 30% of the 650 billion portfolio already in land and housing. I think we'd be happy to partner with KMRC and other partners to actually see how do we deliver these benefits so that those people who have these properties can be developed. Because like Margaret says, there seem to be, I don't think the people who are developing houses have the full information that we are talking about. So there is a lot of work to be done so that they can actually see, without this this was X, and without it, this is what it means. And the lengthening of maturity. Because like I said, data shows housing and land is still a major. So I think there is more work to be done, and I think this is simply the beginning. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think when you talk about projects, financing is normally very important. I think we need to see how we make it much more out there, especially with those who are promoting most of these projects, to see the options they have in terms of raising funds. Sometimes you can raise funds, but at a very high cost. I think maybe those are some of the considerations. But more importantly, I think we need to see how we get this information outside for those who are interested. I think regardless of the form of the promoters, we need to see which vehicle can enable you access optional funds at a cheaper rate. But as we look at affordable housing, I think we need to understand the culture and, of course, the intentions of the masses that we are targeting, so that when we come out with the product at the end, it serves the aim and the objective. Thank you so much.
I think for me, Nyale, we need to ask ourselves, why are Kenyans not taking up mortgages? One of the things is a complicated process, very expensive, and that has also been addressed this morning. And I think the banks, the KMRC, the SACCOs and cooperatives should come up together with a task force where they can simplify this process. And then I'll also be failing if I don't say I've practiced for the last 30 years, and the last 3 or 4 years have been completely a disaster at the Lands Registry to process titles that have not been converted. Sometimes for change of views and amalgamation, it will take you even up to 3, 4, 5 years to finish that. And that has delayed a lot of transactions. And unfortunately, my friend Nyandoro has left. But I hope he can take that. And I'm glad the minister says we have 60 days. He will revitalize that place. The process is not working. It will come up with a lot of unsuccessful processes. Actually, in our farm, we only have two successful sectional properties projects. And even then, we don't have a corporation certificate. But it took a long time. So those are areas you can look into. Make the mortgage process a little easier and less complicated. This is 3 million you're taking, and perhaps innovative systems where a member of the family can take over a mortgage and things like those. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A round of applause to my panel as I hand over the podium to Julius for a number of questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Yanga, for that. And the panel, there was a question from here. Just one question.
Thank you, Madam Karanja. On the VAT exemptions, I have a question. What's the difference between zero-rated and VAT exemption? And then I also would like to support your call for automation. We're really here to support that. We have a project with State Department and KPDA to support 12 applications get tax exemption. So we can use those learnings to support automation. Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly.
Thank you. My name is Benson Kimani from Harambee Sacco, and mine is on pension. Well, my understanding is that a member can use up to 40% towards a mortgage, but he still has to use the same title deed as security, which is also the security that I need myself. So my question is, how do we reconcile the two? Thank you.
The mortgage regulations of 2020, I think.
Hi, my name is Anne Mwangi. I'm a sustainability consultant, and my question goes to Madam Margaret Karanja. So seeing as there's a decree by the Ministry of Housing to have units built with EDGE as the minimum standard, that's excellence in design for greater efficiencies as a minimum standard, which looks at energy, water, and embodied carbon in materials. So my question lies specifically in renewable energy. If you're to meet a certain percentage, to achieve a certain percentage, say 20% relief from renewable energy, are there tax exemptions for solar panels that might be invested in affordable housing units? Thank you.
Thank you. There's one question here.
Good afternoon. My name is George Kinyanjui from Kenya Women Microfinance Bank. My question is direct to Samson of NCA, job on accreditation of artisans and site supervisors. But the question is, after that, after we accredit them, do we go ahead further to enhance them with skills of construction afterwards? Thank you.
one last question and then we take all of them.
Thank you. My name is Anansiata Ndumi from Mwalimu Assets Management. Mine is more of a comment to the officer from RBA. First of all, let me commend you for that particular product of 40%. I think we are making at Mwalimu Assets very good traction in regards to getting conversions or getting people to sign up on the 40%. I would just like to share an insight that maybe you can assist us in. There is a particular segment of pensioners who are over maybe 50, 60 years. They've worked for over a period of 40 years. They've been members of this contribution, employer-employee contribution. Now, this cadre is actually a low cadre in organizations, and one of the challenges they are actually facing is influencing the pensioners, the administrators, to move very, very fast after all the criteria has been met as set out in your regulations so that they can access their pension funds to buy their houses. So I don't know what you can do to assist once the criteria and the application is met for disbursement, what you can do to assist actually the powerless in organizations. So for encouragement, I would just like to say, I think the 40% RBA, which is what we've nicknamed it, is actually a game changer in this sector. I think since you allowed us to start advertising and marketing where we come from, we've actually gotten almost 50 people. The challenge is what my colleague has inferred. We have to deposit the title. Most of these titles are actually charged, so that's taking a little bit longer. So I don't know how you can assist us in sort of converting that particular investment to house ownership. But thank you very much for that product.
Thank you. To the panelists, we can take those questions, starting with the distinction between VAT exempt and VAT zero rated.
Thank you very much, Madam. That's a bit technical, but I will explain. When we talk of zero rating, it just means that an item is taxable, but at the rate of zero. And that has an implication on the input tax, or the tax that the supplier has paid to acquire that item. When it is zero rated, the person will charge tax at zero rate, but they are entitled to recoup the tax element associated with the procurement of that item. That is what it means. When it comes to an exempt item, it means it doesn't attract tax at all. It's not taxable. It doesn't have the rate of zero. But then it means the person who procured it is not entitled to recoup the input associated with that. That is the difference. You also raised an issue to do with the automation. And if I heard you right, it's like you're suggesting that this can be funded from your end. Very good news indeed. And if it is possible then to fund this process, the driver of the process is the National Treasury. I know one of the development partners from the United States of America is funding automation of another process for the donor related tax exemption. So I think if it is possible then to fund this process from your end, you can contact the National Treasury, specifically the Office of the Permanent Secretary. Then there was another question from Madam here regarding the tax exemption for solar panels that may be used in the delivery of affordable houses. And the answer to that is yes, if it has a tax element, and indeed it does, as long as the project is approved by the CS, then that will qualify for tax exemption, and exemption will be processed upon approval by the CS National Treasury. That again is done if the Cabinet Secretary responsible for housing does a recommendation for that project to be considered for the tax incentives under the affordable housing regime. I think with that,
Thank
your questions have been responded to.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. There are two questions regarding the mortgage regulations to the RBA.
Thank you very much, Benson and Anastasia, for your questions. To start off is the issue of title. What happens is that because this property represents a purchase of the property rather represents a withdrawal out of a pension scheme, that translates really to access of your benefits before when you as a member of a scheme should get those particular benefits. So because it's just a conversion of money into property, that title deed for that particular property just has to be encumbered by the trustees to register that interest that they have on that particular property. The title deed is not kept by the trustees. Ideally, the title deed should be given back to you for the event that if you're buying a property that goes beyond the 40% or the 7 million cap, you can actually use it to access more finance to afford that particular property. So here we are just making sure that the interest of the member and the trustees is registered, but the title deed can actually be used for purposes of securing additional financing from any other financier. With respect to Anastasia's comments, is yes, thank you very first and foremost, thank you for the appreciation of the mortgage regulations. What we do is, as RBA, we first have to approve the amendment to the trust deed and rules that oversee the running of a pension scheme. So for any scheme that would wish to offer this particular service, the trust deed must be amended, and that is registered with us. So for purposes of fast-tracking this process is for the authority to hasten that particular process. And we do that. We purpose to do this within 60 days. Over and above that, trustees under the law have the responsibility of approving these particular applications. So what we are doing is we are also sensitizing the trustees on the emerging issues that we are learning from the implementation of these mortgage regulations. So to that extent, those are the initiatives we're doing, but it's a product that as a regulator we facilitate, but the implementation is done at the scheme level. So we are interested to also embrace any additional suggestions on how we would improve the implementation of this particular service. Thank you.
Asante sana for the responses. There was a question to NCA regarding the artisans.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kinyanjui, for the question. Perhaps I'll answer your question by taking a bit of a longer route in terms of telling you the capacity building programs that we have for both our contractors and skilled construction workers. As a requirement, we are supposed to do carry out CPD programs, that is continuous professional development programs for the contractors. That happens on an annual basis. So in terms of capacity building, we also have a business development department that looks for opportunities for partnerships for largely our SME contractors, so that they can also partner with bigger contractors, both local and foreign, in terms of them being able to access bigger projects. And we see the affordable housing space is one of the areas where we intend to have such partnerships developed for purposes of developing joint ventures for these contractors. As far as the skilled construction workers are concerned, what we are doing is we have what we call the continuous technical development programs for all the skilled construction workers and construction site supervisors. So on an annual basis, we have again programs that are run across the country in all counties, and we basically partner even with the county governments in terms of identifying the recently accredited skilled construction workers and taking them through programs. It could just be life skills or even technical development that improves their capacity. Over and above that, we have also identified specific trades that are then applicable in the construction industry. At the moment, I think there are a total of about 59 trades that have been developed over the traditional 8 that we had. That's masonry, plumbing, and others that we know, to 59, because construction is also quite, it has basically developed. So on those trades that we identify, we take them through programs that improve their skills. If it's a tiler, previously you'll find a mason doing masonry work, plaster plus tiling. But nowadays you have a tiler who will focus largely on tiling, and that's what they do. On the affordable housing program, that's a big area. So we definitely must improve their skills. We must provide them with the tools that they require. So we have partnerships with the manufacturers that take them through those trainings. And even industry, we have worked with Tiveta and other institutions that again offer these programs on our behalf to ensure that we build the skills of the construction workers. When we started accrediting skilled workers, we could hardly get 10,000 workers in a year. You can imagine. And yet we know there are, I think, over 300,000 based on the studies that we have done or surveys that we have undertaken. Because the program that we had relied largely on formal training, and there were very few when we started. So of course, with the recognition of prior learning apprenticeship programs, we are able to bring more of them onto the accreditation programs that we have. And with time, we'll have enough skilled laborers that will then, or skilled workers that will be able to undertake the program for the country.
Thank you. Thank you for the responses to the questions. I'd like us to appreciate our panel and the moderator, Santeni Sana. Let me invite you to resume your seats as we progress to the next session of this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now setting stage for the final presentation we have on day 1 of the Affordable Housing Conference. And this presentation will be on the legal policy and institutional review of the affordable housing sector in Kenya. And that presentation will be made by Sita Shah, Senior Affordable Housing Specialist with FSD Kenya. So you are most welcome on set. Please use the staircase on that side. And let me just sample some thoughts. There's a lot of feedback coming online, a lot of conversation around affordability and what actually defines affordability in housing. So many questions around the youth and whether we are catering to their nuances as far as housing is concerned. And therefore, we shall just continue capturing that as we progress. Karibu sana. So for the next 40 minutes, let's listen in. We shall throw in questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I want to appreciate everyone who's waited till the end. We promise to make it worth your while. So I'm Sita Shah, and I'm very honored to be joined by my colleague Muriuki Muriungi, who helped us undertake the Affordable Housing Regulatory Review. I know we have 40 minutes. We'll cover the regulatory review, and we'll also cover some stuff we're doing on data, because I think everyone is talking about data, and we have that undergoing as well. So please just advise how there we go, it's come. So here are emails, and I want to start with talking a bit about FSD Kenya for those who don't know us. We're an independent trust. We work to the alleviation of poverty through creating an inclusive finance system. And our pillars for our next 5-year strategy are very aligned to everything every person has spoken about today. So it's an inclusive digital economy, it's gender and women's empowerment, supporting micro and small enterprise, and climate change. As you can see, there isn't a housing pillar in FSD, but we believe housing, which is one of our programs, crosses across all these 4 pillars. So FSD's housing program focuses on all 4 sub-markets of housing. We start with incremental housing, which is how most of the housing is built. We heard from Mr. Mwangi and Mr. George of KWFT. We heard from the SACCOs. And we're really pleased to partner with KWFT and would like to partner more with SACCOs. And it's really recognizing that this is how Kenyans build. How can we help to scale it up? How can we bring in operational efficiencies and with time even try to raise the data so that we can raise concessional financing? In the informal settlements, we all know that this conditions are deplorable. We're pleased to have launched a last mile sanitation fund in Mukuru, and we'll get learnings from them with the partner Akiba Mashinani. And in the small landlord, that's something that's very overlooked, but it's the rental segment. We do need to think about rent. 80% of urban Kenya, 90% of Nairobi rents, and we have several initiatives we're pursuing to try to scale up rental by the small landlords. And in the formal sector, I've mentioned a few times, we have an initiative with State Department and KPDA to allow 12 developers to get access to VAT exemption. And we've launched something called a Jenga Green app to help the market understand what green suppliers are available. So that's just giving an overview of the program. And then what has been alluded to so often, and PS Hinga said it well, is the housing value chain is long and complex. So over a year ago, to set the stage, we have done a review of Kenya's laws with an insight on gender. You know, we've looked at it for other sectors, and we thought, let's commission a regulatory review of the affordable housing sector. And we thought it would take us 3 months. But as you can see, to build a house, you need to go through all the components. You need to have the land, the title, the infrastructure, etc. So I would like to take guesses from the audience. How many laws you think Muriuki uncovered for us? Please come on, participate. Give us a show of hands of how many laws or policies that we uncovered touch on the housing value chain. Come on, let's have some participation. 50? I'll take a few more guesses. Just yell it out. We're tired, come on. It's a long value chain. Tell us how many you think we uncovered that directly relate to housing on one of the components. And we know all the components need to be paid for. 90. It's pretty high, huh? Somebody else? 5? Well, we're saying it's complex, but let's keep going. So we started these, I hope you can see them, but this presentation will be circulated. This is 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, and 140. So we stopped at 100. We just couldn't conclude the work. We've just launched our review as a draft on our website. The link is in the presentation that'll be emailed. But it just kept getting bigger. And Muriuki was just tearing his hair out because you can uncover all these laws. You can write about all these laws. You can write about what the gaps are. But how do you package it in a way
that the audience can understand it. So our document as it stands, we've got feedback from the stakeholders we emailed it to, is it's too overwhelming. But that's the point. I think what we learned from the process is it's hard to deliver housing in Kenya, because if there are 140 laws that may touch your project, we need to simplify, and we really need to work as an industry. The reason we've launched this as a draft is we want to work with the industry, public and private, and say, what are the key ones we should approach? Because we all know how you move forward. You take small bite-sized chunks, work together, solve one small issue, and move to the next thing. So I think, just to say, we also reviewed 48 cases, and we've included information on the cases. So I think for the lawyers in this room, you won't find a 200-page document overwhelming, but the feedback we're getting from others is too overwhelming, can't read. So we want to really agree, what are the priorities? How can we support to tackle the top priorities? And we're going to have a stab at what we think the priorities are. So on the overarching value chain, the CS Zakaria said it in the morning, and I felt like we'd shared our script. But he talked about the need for all these bills that were discussed in the 12th Parliament to be brought forward in the 13th. So the key one, we really commend the organizational change to move the State Department of Housing and Urban Development to the Ministry of Lands, because land is the very first component. And we kept hearing, we heard from the last panel, it takes time to get a change of use. These are the fundamental things that stop you being able to finance the house because the title is not there. So we really commend that move, and we hope that closer collaboration will be seen in practice. The key recommendation, we believe, from 140 laws that we studied, and we looked at it in various ways. Do you need new legislation? Does the legislation exist, but you need regulations? Are the regulations there, but they're not implemented? Do you need new policy, or do you just need support? So we divided into all those different buckets. And we felt the key thing is to create a clear housing bill. And we have a draft, the Housing Bill 2021. We understand there's a Housing Omnibus Bill 2022 being drafted. And we want to put our weight and our mind and our resources to help create a bill that works for our country and to simplify all the blockages we've found. And we also feel the bill should be very cognizant of mixed use, because there's no reason to monitor housing any differently than you monitor an office building or you monitor a hotel or a hospital, because the real estate still has to be built in a way that will be sustainable over time. It also allows for mixed-use developments, which are seen as key for affordable housing. So what are the key things the bill must have? We must look at integrating consumer protection. We must look at how to make sure, we must look at harmonizing all the existing new and regulatory frameworks, of which there's so many, so much overlap. Define each person's mandate so that institution's mandate is carried out till the next step. We keep promoting a data bank to understand the true costs of delivery, the blockages, so that we can incrementally overcome those costs and really streamline the functions envisaged in the current bill for the Director General. So that is our number one regulatory gap. I'll hand it over to Muriuki to talk through some of the other regulatory gaps before I come back. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and good evening. Yes, we looked at different value chains. That's the land assembly, where you acquire land and where you title it and you register it. Then we also looked at the physical planning, which is the next section. Then you go to construction, then you go to financing in terms of both supply side and demand side. And in the Land Assembly, land acquisition, here we've just highlighted some of the main recommendations that we think are useful. And, but there are very many that some of the suggestions and the findings we get from the report, which when you have occasion to look at it, then you might be able to see. But we just highlighted a few. And in terms of some of the laws that require review, the Sectional Properties Act, of course, they have a deadline of 2 years, which is actually expiring in next month in like 3 weeks or so. I think on 20th of December, that was the deadline within which conversions were supposed to have happened. That hasn't happened, and that obviously now requires an amendment by Parliament. Otherwise, we'll be in a limbo. There's also a few other things in that act in terms of providing some exemptions. If you want to exempt some of the things from conversions, then you need guidance, further guidance on that. In terms of the regulations also, there is need for more clarity on what is mixed-use development. In the Land Act, we see foreclosure. That is, when you're exercising statutory power of sale as a bank or as a financier in order to recover in case of default, we see the process being really lengthy. In particular, actually, you need at least 6 months to foreclose as a financial institution, just the processes. And if you add the auctioneers, almost another 45 days, it can take you to 7 months. That is a little bit difficult, especially on financial institutions, and may actually be stifling credit or lending. On the National Land Policy, we know it was supposed to have been reviewed after 10 years, that's around 2019, and I think it's a process that has been ongoing, but obviously needing fast tracking. In the fiscal planning, for the ones that need review, of course, every county, the county governments are the ones that do planning approvals. And what we see is, of course, there's a lot around zoning, around development, and every county has those issues. So that's a concern. There's the fiscal planning, physical and land use planning, building regulations. They need to look at, when we look at disabilities, we need to look at other disabilities over and above the mobility disabilities. And then there's a Physical Planning Handbook of 2008, which was based on the Physical Planning Act of 1996. Of course, requires an updating to conform to the 2019 law, because that's the one that serves as a guide for professionals in the industry. In terms of those that are requiring support in implementation, there was the issue of affordable housing is one of the things one of the projects classified as those of strategic or national projects, which then you can get a fast-track approval from the CS. But that is not happening, so we need to look at how to unlock that, as well as the Urban Areas and Cities Act provides for how you can have cross-city and inter-county, cross-municipality infrastructural services. Knowing that the counties are actually facing a lot of infrastructure challenges, that is something that then we can also look at. The construction and maintenance, the CEO of the National Construction Authority just spoke about the building code, which is towards the final stages. And of course, it has provisions on how to green more. But of course, there are a few other issues in that code that could actually have some improvement. But of course, we'll see whether that happens at this stage or another stage. There was a draft construction industry policy that was being pushed by the county governments through the Council of Governors, but seems like didn't get traction. That was back in 2018. And then, so as stakeholders still need to know whether we need such a policy to guide the sector. Relating to the issue of the collapse of buildings, we see NCA and the National Building Inspectorate, which has been an agency within the State Department of Public Works, which has also been doing the job. So concerns about some overlap and how to deal with that. And the issue of one-stop shop framework, I think there's been discussions around that for a while, whereby you're able to have single approvals, just one system. We know a number of counties have been rolling out such, even the e-development permits, but some have stopped. And there's a challenge there still. maybe there's something that also needs a bit of support for counties to automate all those approvals. Yeah, so these are some of the approvals you need before you deliver housing. There are more than 20, actually almost 30 approvals that you may actually need at one point or another. Most of them, of course, pre-construction, and just continues to add to the point that we're making about the whole complexity of the housing value chain. Yes, I'll let Sita to do on financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariuki. So I think we have only highlighted the key ones that we feel, but we're inviting you all to look at our draft, and we're also inviting how do we structure a process that we work with government to amend the regulations as they're needed or enact the regulations. I want to add one thing on construction, and that's parking. So our code still asks us for parking. And parking not only drives up the cost of construction, in fact, we've done a very nice blog. The cost of an extra parking space at a particular developer in Tata City is almost 900,000 shillings. So the cost of parking not only drives up the construction cost, but the cost of parking or the fact that the regulations require parking is a key reason there's poor building construction. Because what we see is happening, and when we talk about the small landlord sector, so all the what we call affordable rental units, which are not in formal settlement, they're delivered quasi-formally all along the spine roads, if you go to Githurai, etc. But there's no parking. And the reason it's affordable is because there's no parking. But the reason that so many buildings fall down is the same landlord has to pay something to the council when they come to view it because they're breaking a law of not providing parking. Do you see the argument I'm making? That's why I think that getting rid of parking, we don't need to provide parking. I've lived, when I went to study specifically affordable housing finance, and in the middle of winter, you pay for a parking space a block away from where you live. You're carrying your groceries in the snow. We've done it, and you pay 20,000 shillings rent for the parking space, yeah? So we need to move to that so that we're also convincing our nation to invest in public transport. It can't continue to be driven by a parking culture. So we keep emphasizing that parking limits affordability, and a new insight we've had when we're talking to developers and landlords, how come you are able to deliver housing on these spinal roads? And that's where you get the decent housing renting for 10,000, 12,000 a month. How come you're able to do that without parking? Whereas any developer we support are caught up in parking issues, and that's where we learned that because they're asked for it, because it's in the code, it's creating issues of compliance. So on the finance side, we came up with so many different laws that impact finance. And the key ones we feel we need to look at are the National Rating Bill, and adopting that quickly is very important because that's the only way county governments are going to be able to raise funding to invest in infrastructure for housing. And on the Landlord and Tenant Bill, we also request the fast-tracking and adoption of it, but we think we need to rethink rent control as a regulatory tool. Because every time you try to control a market that works well, and in Kenya, rental works very well in the residential sector, the more issues you're going to create. So we rather empower the markets to work, and we have a very bold suggestion, Madame Karanjan will also engage more with the PS, is for rental housing that's provided for 15,000 shillings or less a month, why don't we consider a flat tax of 3% on the gross? And no matter how big your portfolio is, yes, bring it on. Bring on 20,000 units as one landlord. Make them safe, make them green, and have a lower tax rate. And that tax rate can be phased out after a few years, but at least let's get compliant buildings, because we keep finding affordable rental, but it's not very compliant, and very expensive housing, that's built through the formal sector, and then an investor buys it and rents it.
that is compliant, and we're trying to bridge that gap. In other legislation, I think we've talked about demand and supply side incentives. We're very pleased to hear that there's more support being given to them, and the need to create digital tools to collect the multiplier effect and to make sure the tax that we're giving up as a nation is going to build a nation. And so we really do want to support that. And then also the housing guidelines. It's not clear. They were launched in the previous administration. What are the rules now? We have new PPP rules. We're now contributing land for free. Previously, land was in exchange for 30% of the units. So let's sit together and provide simple guidelines that the stakeholders know how they can engage in the supply chain. We've talked about the retirement benefits. We wonder if there's scope to reduce the taxation, because the biggest issue we're finding is when you want to move your funds from the savings of your retirement into housing, the tax kicks in very quickly. So it's almost against the spirit of the regulation, because I would not want to give up 1, 2, or 3 million of my hard-earned money to put in housing if almost 30% of that will be taxed, and simplifying the processes. And then reviewing the Housing Act and saving for housing. This is why I feel that my remarks were almost written in conjunction with the CS's remarks, because he talked about savings. We need to save for our assets. But how do we reward people who save for housing? And there is the relief that Madame Karanja talked about, but there's very little uptake of it. Why? I had understood it was removed last year in the income tax law. Has it been reintroduced? And how do we balance saving for housing with saving for retirement, saving for NHIF? How do we create fair mechanisms so we don't overburden our citizens? So that's what I think we can say about the regulatory review. It is available on our website. We welcome comments. We think there's a long road, but we're really appreciative of the enthusiasm and the energy. And now I'll take a breather and talk about our data agenda. So our data agenda, when we started our FSD affordable housing program in 2020, we sized out if we need 2 million units now and we need 350,000 a year. That's the new numbers per World Bank, not 250. So in 20 years, we need 9 million units. If the units cost as little as $5,000, you need $45 billion in capital to support our housing need. If they cost $10,000, so roughly, between $500,000 and 1 million shillings, we're talking about $45 to $90 billion. It's just too much for anyone to do themselves. And even though we have commitments of hundreds of millions of dollars from different DFIs, it's still going to be a drop in the ocean unless our markets work well. So how do we make our markets work well? And we came up with something after studying more than 30 initiatives ongoing. And we kept saying, there's more that people have done in housing than we knew, but why is there not enough housing? And we don't understand the challenges people have faced. That was the conclusion, yeah? And all this research is available on our website. So that's where we launched the Open Access Initiative. And that was my question to the PS this morning. So as an FSD, as a network, we've said if we support any player in the housing field with any support, be it a bit of finance, be it research, we want data from you. And there's 4 types of data. One is the product. What housing unit are you helping to build? How big is it? Where is it located? How much did it cost you in terms of land, construction cost, etc.? 2 is the process. How long did it take you to get all your approvals? We just showed you that developers we work with need 29 approvals. So how long did it take? What's the cost of getting them? So we can support with data a one-stop shop. It's one thing to say there are a lot of approvals. It's another thing to say, look at these 12 developers and look at how long it took them, right? The third is the people who actually live there. Do we really understand? And this comes to the many bankers in the room who we work closely with. And there still is a demand-supply affordability. I would be bold enough to say that the income bracket of $150,000 a month, that's the cap for KMRC, may be too low for families to access a 4 or 6 million shilling house. So we need to really know who are the people, what's their income, how much time do they spend commuting, etc. And the last is the performance, because one thing we really need to think about is it's not the rush to build housing, but it's the sustainable housing we want to build, that even over 15, 20 years, the houses perform well. So if you create mortgages or tenant purchase schemes, etc., what is the estate management? Is it worth, as Edge says, put in a bit more now, over the long term your service charge will be less. Is it worth it or not? We need the data. So that is simply what our open access initiative is. And that can lead to policy decisions and it lead to fundraising. And this is a very simple example, if you can see, but this is one of the developers we're supporting with access to VAT. It took us so much to convince developers to share their data, but a couple of developers were like, I want to share my data. And when we looked at the data, there was nothing scary. You know, most people say developers will never share their data because their profits are too high. This is a live project. We haven't made the numbers up. It's an apartment project near Kawangware. Who would say that a 9% developer fee is too high? It's not. You know, you put in sweat and blood over 5 years. You put in so much equity. And this is what we're requesting all public stakeholders in the room, that if you have given VAT incentive, if you have given land, ask your developer to share this, even if it's just with you. But ask them to share it with the DFI world, with the funding world, with the banks, with everyone, so we know. And you see, when you look at this, you can start challenging some assumptions. So according to this project, every project is different, right? But according to this project, we're saying, what is the total cost for land? What is the cost per unit for land? What is the cost per built square meter for land? We want to understand that. And we find that the land cost is 9% of the total cost. What is the construction cost? What are the soft costs, the marketing fees? You can see marketing fees are very, very high. So if we can empower platforms like Boma Yangu, we can quickly start to chip away at costs. And this is what we call open access. And this is my plea. If there's one thing I want the people in the room here to listen to and take away from us is, if you support housing, please help us collect this data so we can make informed decisions about how much housing costs. And the reason I circle the construction cost is there is a figure that's banded around that you can only get VAT exemption if you're delivering your units for less than 50,000 a square meter. So this developer has done their best, and their cost is close to 96,000 a square meter, including land, including construction, including finance, including infrastructure, including the profit. They're almost double what we understand the government guidelines are. Are they expensive? We're not sure. This is an extract I got from the State Department's website that says the construction cost, all inclusive, is 44,000. So maybe the previous developer isn't expensive, because you can see their construction cost is 33. But when you look at the bottom line, it's 100,000, because they're providing land, they're providing financing, they're doing the marketing, they're not getting an off-take guarantee. And while we support all the large developments that can deliver thousands of units a year, we must not forget the smaller developers who can do 500 units, 200 units, 1,000 units. They're all equally important, because the one thing that my research has shown me is land is there. So how do we make everyone deliver on the land they have to the market? Because the demand is 9 million units. So this is my appeal from today. Please help us. It's very easy. When we got developers, 2 out of the 12 have given us this data. We're still working with others. But every government department, please, you have the data. You've given them the land. So let's cost this out. The final thing I'd like to talk about that we're really pleased we'll have a soft launch on in either later this year or early next year is the Data Explorer. And we've launched this Data Explorer with a lot of collaboration between Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, 71.4, that's a consultancy, and REAL, that's a housing innovator and investor from the UK. But they have a presence in Kenya for more than 20 years. And the reason for the Data Explorer is simply to start taking data that exists. KNBS is always doing really interesting surveys. Take the data that exists, put it in a way that anyone can view it, and that can help you. So this will be launched soon. You can see the portal, and this is an example of some of the data we've started extracting. But we must say the data is limited, but there is some data we're putting on, and now we're coming to the market to say, what other data can you give us to help us build the ecosystem so people can take data-driven risk? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the FSD Kenya team for your presentation and the emphasis on data. We'd like to take any quick questions we have for the presentation. There's a hand here. Just one question, please. There are 3 hands, actually.
Yep. Thank you very much. My name is Chris Kandir from Lionsgate Global Partners. I think this is great work, especially around the review on the legislation. I think as a means of moving this forward, there is, especially when it comes to the counties, and this is something that I've seen from my previous experience, but in the water sector, I think there's a need, especially when it comes to county legislation, for some level of standardization. And that is something which I think FSD, maybe as a means of moving this forward, to pick up as a way of, continuing, on the same stream and helping the counties. Yeah, so I think more of a comment, less of a question. Thanks.
Thank you. There are 2 hands here.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Mine is just a comment. I'm not in support of no parking in the housing project. I really think that for the low-cost housing, we need to make decent housing, a space for children to play, and a space for recreation. We should not create vertical slums. So for me, I think that parking is not so expensive to add onto the costs. That's my comment.
The parking trade-off. Yeah.
Thank you. Samson Lukoba from NCA. I just have a comment on the issue of CIP. CIP was actually an initiative of the National Construction Authority. It is actually, at least up to the life of the last government, it was just about we presented to Cabinet for adoption and then onward to Parliament for enactment. And then secondly, NBI versus NCA. I think they are very distinct. NBI largely deals with existing houses. NCA is responsible for regulating the basically all construction activity. If you remember, NBI was actually established after one of the unfortunate incidents, the collapse at Huruma in 2016, and it was to look at all the existing buildings around the country. It was established by executive order, so it has its mandate well cut out as far as buildings are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hand? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a lot of work has been done by FDS there. Thank you, Madam. And as I sat here just flowing with that presentation, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. That we can have 140 laws just addressing the issue of housing. I mean, I think something serious needs to be done. And my proposal on this, given the complexity and the different pieces of legislation here and there that are delaying the delivery of affordable housing, I think perhaps KMRC, you need to look at whether you can have multi-agency approach to this, so that then you have a task force with members drawn from the key institutions that are drivers of this particular program that we want to see delivered, like yesterday. And then when you have the multi-agency approach, you can review the frameworks that are here and there, and you come up with one single framework that will help to address all the issues and ease the cost of development of the houses that then we need to roll out to the market. Multi-agency approach, that is the point.
Thank you. I think that last point on KMRC will be taken by one of the team members, whether it's Joe or Nyale or whoever. But let's start with
maybe I forgot to mention when we had a discussion that the other tax incentive that is available is that if you own a house through a mortgage, you start to benefit. The interest that you pay on that loan, you get tax relief on it. That's very, very important. Please take note of that. You have a mortgage loan which you're servicing, you are entitled to a tax relief on the interest that you pay, and that actually can be done through the payroll. Thank you very much.
Asante. Let's take those questions and the comments. We began with the counties and standardization. You want to respond to that? Or?
I think it's better if Muriuki answers some of the more technical ones, then I'll do the ones he doesn't. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. I do agree on the need for standardization of with counties. Of course, some of them have had a bit of capacity issues, but of course, which then speaks to your point that they need more support in terms of some of the things that they are doing. For instance, I know with respect to physical planning, with the preparation of county special plans, for instance, the National Land Commission has been sort of supporting them, but up to now, I think only less than 10 counties have actually developed those county special plans, yet they are a requirement, which means, more than 70% haven't. Of course, so it's a call for a bit of support on a variety of issues, actually. So I do agree with the point. In terms of the issue on parking requirements, I'll let Sita speak to it a bit, but I think the reason why we were putting that forward is, I think based on the study that FSD had conducted, they noticed that parking costs are a significant part of the total housing costs. And therefore, if you're looking at affordable housing, which is mostly catering to persons without vehicles, then if it is adding to the total cost at the end of the day, then questions arise. Of course, we're also aware that there was the decision, I think, from the High Court, which was speaking about the need to provide playing area for children and water and clean water and a few other amenities as a constitutional right. And of course, then that has to be balanced against the developers on whether we can actually deliver affordable houses while taking all that into account. A particular concerning issue is whether we should load on that onto developers when it is primarily a role for government, now that even developers are beginning to take up a significant part of providing infrastructure or trunk or bulk infrastructure, which are also expensive. But that's a discussion, and that can continue. With respect to the issue on, is the CEO from NCA? Yes, we do agree that the NBA comes post. The NBA inspects buildings that are already in place, NCA initially. But the whole point we're saying is the NBI, the NCA, and the county governments, they are all involved in that whole business of approvals, and maybe need to check so that we see what's the issue with respect to the inspections of buildings. Those are the ones I would take.
So thank you. On the county standardization, as Muriuki said, we agree. In fact, we feel quite disappointed. We're working with Kenya Green Building Society to provide green building guidelines to 2 counties. And we really feel this should start at a national level. And we saw that through the process, right? That 99% of what a county will say, or 98%, should be across the nation. We're kind of similar in our geography, etc. So now we've taken the conversation to State Department of Public Works, and we're saying, can we support you with the National Green Building Guidelines, as opposed to working county by county? So it's a very important point, and we do need to work on it. I'd also take a moment to mention a very interesting tool that the UN have developed. It's taken them 12 years. It's called County Own Source Rapid Assessment Tool. So you can either do it yourself for free, or you can pay the UN to help you do it, to actually understand what your sources of revenue are. And that's the very starting point, because if you don't know what your sources of revenue are, how are we going to go for these county green bonds? Like, I just start with the basics. I really just approach finance with the way that I manage my house budget. Income in has to be more than income out. But I need to know what my income in and what my income out is to project. So I feel we need to start there. So I take your point about parking. I think Muriuki's addressed it. I think I'd like to give another point. It's all about choice. So we don't feel the code should force developers to give parking. If you give parking, pay for it. Let the demand pay for it. But it shouldn't be the code forcing you. And we see all around, 90% of new buildings don't have parking. So there's non-compliance. But that non-compliance is leading to more buildings falling down because somebody has paid for that non-compliance, right? So not just on the parking, but it could be on other things. And I'll give a similar example. It's similar to if I want an ensuite bathroom versus a common bathroom. So I'll pay more for it. So we really want that requirement to be removed. And we can't agree more about green space. Green space is what we need. We're getting more and more dense. Most Nairobians work 10, 12-hour shifts and with commutes. And there's nowhere to relax. So whether that goes back to being a strong county responsibility, or we try to encourage developers to provide it, but if developers are providing it, of course that's an extra cost of land that needs to be paid for somehow. But really, really agree that amenities can change it. And it's not just in low-income housing. Even in high-income housing, I notice in areas a tiny sliver of green space, not even the size of this podium, and the rents are 20, 30% more, because you want to breathe, you want your kids to play. So I really take that into account. Again, on the multi-agency, we need to try. We want, and it's just how do we do it in a way that is efficient? And I think we all feel excited. We feel there's more energy. So let's really, that's the call to action from our side, is we're here to support. But what are the 2 or 3 things we want to take up as a sector for 2022? And then what can we take up later for 2023, et cetera? Sorry, for 2023, then 2024. Because if we had a 5-year, 10-year plan, we could really work towards it. So even having more of a programmatic approach rather than a project approach can help. I think we've covered it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Was there a comment from KMRC on the multi-agency? Yes, sir, please.
Yes, thank you for that comment, Margaret, and certainly appreciate Sita and a colleague for this presentation, which was very enlightening. Now, in relation to the multi-agency, I think that's one of the key takeaways for this conference. And the CS this morning accepted to form a multi-sector agency to deal with a couple of issues, essentially around the challenges we're facing on the delivery of affordable housing. And we have potentially to add a couple of others now, including these issues that are coming up about legislation, and certainly also resolving the issues that are raised in this conference itself, so that when we have resolutions, by the time we're coming back to the next conference, we report back on how we have dealt with the issues that were raised in the past. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Joe from KMRC, where he's the CEO. We have no further questions for them, I believe. Looks like we're content. Thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause and usher you back to your seats. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of day one of the Affordable Housing Conference. Thank you so much for your participation and for your patience. I know we began a bit late, but we are now just about 20 minutes behind schedule. So thank you so much for your understanding and for being part of this. Tomorrow, I'd like us to settle here a lot earlier. That's by 8:30, because between 8:45 and 9 a.m., we'll essentially be engaging in reflection of what we have discussed today and the takeouts. And that will be a very interactive session between myself and yourself. So let's come ready with some thoughts so that we thrash through that. Then we get into the agenda of the day, which shall be kicking off at 9 a.m. With a presentation from the National Mortgage Corporation of Malaysia, really just looking at what best practices we can borrow across the board. Thank you so much for being part of this, for sharing questions, for the panelists, and let's be here tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. to do this all again. You are free to leave at your own pleasure and leisure. Sorry to be back. There are limited parking slots at the reception, so just go fast come, fast serve, pick a ticket. Tomorrow you will come and you won't have too much trouble. So at the reception, just grab a ticket, which will give you better access tomorrow for parking. Thanks.